Every person who has ever built a life they are genuinely proud of can point to one moment that started it. Not a strategy, not a morning routine they read about in a magazine. One moment. And here is what is strange about that moment. Nobody else was in the room when it happened. No one saw it. No one applauded. The bank account did not change that day. The circumstances did not change that day. But something inside shifted so completely, so finally, that every action taken afterward moved in a different direction, as if a compass had been reset. You have been told that wealth begins with the right plan, with discipline, with the right opportunity appearing at the right time. You have been told to build better habits, track your spending, network harder, think bigger. Maybe you have tried some of those things. Maybe you have tried most of them. So why does the distance between where you are and where you need to be still feel exactly as wide as it did 3 years ago? Because none of those things is where wealth actually begins. Wealth begins in one unwitnessed second, a second most people never reach, not because they are incapable, but because no one ever told them it was the second that mattered. What you are about to hear is not another plan. It is the thing that makes every plan finally work. There is a door that has been standing unlocked your entire life. By the time this audio ends, you will not only know where it is, you will have already walked through it. Chapter 1. Every fortune started with one unwitnessed second. There is a moment that repeats across human history, in every era, on every continent, in every language ever spoken. Not a battle, not a speech, not a signed document or a celebrated launch, a private moment. A person alone in a room, sometimes exhausted, sometimes utterly still, and something inside them shifts, not loudly, not ceremonially, but with the finality of a door closing behind you in the dark. The people who end up with wealth, real and lasting wealth, almost never point to a strategy or a system as their true beginning. They point, if they are honest, to a specific interior second that no one else witnessed. You have heard the outer stories, the companies, the investments, the right calls made at the right time. What you have not heard is what happened before all of that. What happened in the room before the room anyone remembers. This audiobook is not early. It is not late. It is here at exactly the moment something in you is ready to stop negotiating. Here is what you already know, even if you have not said it plainly. You are not where you thought you would be by now. That sentence sits in your chest at odd hours, during a commute, right before sleep, sometimes in the middle of a conversation where everyone around you seems comfortable and unbothered. And you are nodding along while something underneath runs a very different calculation. You know how to earn. You know how to spend less in theory. You have read things, listened to things, started things. And still the number in your account does not match the picture that lives in the back of your mind, the one you have been quietly carrying for years. That gap is not a failure of information. There is no piece of financial knowledge you are missing that, once learned, will finally make everything click. The knowledge exists. You have likely already touched it. The actual gap is something else entirely. What it is will take this whole chapter to name correctly, but I want to plant one question in your mind right now. Hold it. Resist answering it for a while. The question is this: has there been a moment, maybe more than one, when you were completely alone and something in you knew with certainty that your financial life could be different, and you waited, not decided against it, not rejected it, just waited? Hold that question. We will come back to it. Meet Carla. She is 31 years old, and it is a Tuesday in October. Not a remarkable Tuesday by any measure. She is sitting at a desk that faces a wall. Her apartment is the kind of functional that never quite becomes a home, furniture chosen for price, not preference. She has a notebook open. She has been writing the same kind of plan she has written 8 or 9 times before. Income columns, savings targets, rough projections. The numbers are careful. The logic is sound. And when she finishes, she puts the pen down and feels nothing. Not discouragement exactly. Not hope. Something more like the sensation of being trapped in a hallway that has been well organized. She looks at the notebook. For the first time, she does not ask what the next step is. She asks a different question entirely. She asks, why do I keep planning as if I am waiting for permission? The notebook does not change. The apartment does not change. But Carla has just crossed a line she did not know existed a minute ago. What happened in that moment was not the birth of a plan. Plans are the scaffolding, not the building. What happened was that she stopped treating her own wealth as a hypothesis and started treating it as a fact that had not yet been arranged in time. That is a different orientation entirely. A hypothesis says, if the conditions are right, this could happen. A fact waiting to be arranged in time says, this is real, and I am now moving toward the version of my life where it is visible. No one saw that shift. No one celebrated it. Carla did not post about it or tell anyone. But from that Tuesday forward, every financial choice she made carried a different weight. Not perfect choices. Not always smart choices, but choices made from a different position inside herself. The results over the following 2 years were not magical. They were directional, steady, compounding. And the compound started that night with a notebook and a question no one else heard. Here is the point, and it is sharper than it first appears. Every outer wealth story you have ever heard is the second chapter. The first chapter is interior and invisible and almost never told, because the person living it often does not recognize its significance while it is happening. The moment looks like nothing. It looks like a person alone, being quiet. But something irreversible is occurring. They are not making a plan. They are making a declaration, not to anyone, not performatively, but to the part of themselves that had been holding the door shut. And the door, it turns out, was never locked from the outside. That is the room that was always unlocked. The door between where you are and where you are trying to go is not secured by your income, or your education, or the city you live in, or the family you came from. It is held by a single belief, and the belief sounds reasonable when you say it out loud. It sounds almost wise. The belief is this: I will fully commit when the time is right, when I have more information, when my situation is a little more stable, when I understand the strategy better. That belief is the mechanism, not laziness, not ignorance, not bad luck. The mechanism that keeps most people standing in the hallway forever is the waiting itself, dressed up as patience and practicality. Here in the first movement of this book, that waiting presents itself as wisdom. Later, you will see something that reframes it entirely. And the reframe is going to feel uncomfortable because it removes the excuse that most people do not even realize they have been using. Remember the shape of your life from 3 years back as it really was, not generally, specifically. What did you think your financial life would look like by now? What were you certain you would have figured out, paid off, started, built? Sit with that for a moment, not to feel bad about the distance, to feel the exact shape of it. Because the distance between that past version of you and this present version of you was filled with information you did gather, steps you did take, plans you did make. And still, something kept resetting. Something kept returning you to the same starting line wearing slightly different shoes. That something is the absence of the interior declaration. Every significant fortune in every era started with one unwitnessed second. A second when a specific person stopped treating their financial ambition as a thing they were pursuing and started treating it as a thing they already were. Not pretending, not visualizing in a vague, hopeful sense, but making the kind of internal declaration that is irreversible. The kind that reorganizes how you read an opportunity, how you respond to a setback, how you allocate 30 minutes on a Wednesday evening that you previously spent doing something that cost you nothing and paid you nothing. The declaration is not about confidence. You can make it scared. You can make it with debt on your shoulders and uncertainty in your hands. The declaration is a commitment to your own version of 𝗓𝗧𝗔𝗡 Tuesday night. The moment you stop asking the plan for permission and start asking yourself what is actually in the way. Here is what the decision horizon looks like from the inside. Before it, your financial choices feel like attempts, experiments you are running to see if they work. After it, your financial choices feel like logistics, the necessary arrangements for a destination you have already accepted as real. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between someone who is trying to build something and someone who is building something. One of those people can be talked out of it by a bad month. The other one uses the bad month as information. The outer wealth story you want begins with 1 second that no one will ever see. This is that second. The real question, the one that the rest of this book will answer in full, is not whether you can generate wealth. The mechanisms exist. The pathways are real. The question is whether you have made the one declaration that makes all subsequent action feel inevitable instead of optional. Because optional things get postponed, and postponed things in the economy of a human life are the same as never. The room has always been unlocked. The only question left is whether you are done standing in the hallway deciding if you are ready to walk in. Chapter 2. You've been preparing to decide, not deciding. Most people believe that more preparation leads to better decisions. You probably believe it too. Almost everyone does. It sounds reasonable. It sounds responsible. It sounds like the kind of thing a serious, thoughtful person would believe. It is wrong, not slightly wrong, not wrong in edge cases, not wrong for certain personality types. Structurally, functionally, completely wrong. And the part that will sting a little is this. The more intelligent you are, the more convincingly wrong you become. Smart people don't avoid decisions by doing nothing. They avoid decisions by doing everything except deciding. They research, they plan, they enroll, they optimize. And they call all of it preparation, which makes it feel productive, which is exactly why it never ends. This chapter is going to name what is actually happening. And once it is named, you will not be able to unsee it. Here is the open loop to carry with you. If preparation were truly about readiness, why do the most prepared people so often remain in exactly the same place they were 2 years ago? Hold that question. It will find its answer before this chapter is done. You know the feeling of being just about ready. Maybe you are there right now. One more book, one more course, one more conversation with someone who has done it. One more spreadsheet, one more savings threshold, one more month of watching the market before you commit to anything. From the inside, it feels almost noble, like you are being careful where others are reckless, but you are standing in a hallway. That image from the last chapter, the room that was always unlocked, it applies here more precisely than anywhere else in this book. Most people do not fail to become wealthy because they lack access. They fail because they have made a permanent residence out of the corridor between knowing and doing. The hallway is familiar. It is safe. And it has been decorated so thoughtfully over the years that it almost looks like a destination. Look back at the season you were in from 3 years back, as it really was. Not abstractly, actually place yourself there. What were you reading? What were you planning? What did you tell yourself you would do once you had figured out one more thing? Now sit with the distance between that version of you and this one. Not the growth, not what you have learned. The distance between what you said you were preparing for and where you actually are. That distance has a name. It is called the preparation trap. 𝗓𝗓 discovered it the hard way, which is the only way most people discover it at all. She was 28 when she bought her first personal finance course. It was a good one, thorough and practical, built around real principles of saving and investing. She finished it in 11 days. She took notes in 3 different colors. She built a tracking spreadsheet with 5 tabs. And then she bought the next course, because the first one hadn't covered options trading in enough depth, and she had read somewhere that options were where the real leverage was. That was course 2. Then came course 3, a real estate fundamentals program from an investor who had built a portfolio of 12 units by age 32. 𝗓𝗓 watched every video twice. She joined the community forum. She answered other people's questions. Instructors noticed her. She was clearly one of the most engaged students they had ever had. By year 3, 𝗓𝗓 had completed 9 courses, read 21 books, attended 4 live seminars, and maintained a detailed journal of investment ideas she intended to act on when the timing was right. Her knowledge was genuine. Ask her about dollar cost averaging, about cap rates on rental properties, about the tax advantages of self-directed retirement accounts. She could teach it back to you clearly and correctly. Her net worth had grown by $400. She wasn't lazy. That is what made it so hard to see. She was working constantly. She just wasn't deciding. Here is the thing about 𝗓𝗓 that might feel uncomfortably close to your own story. She was not afraid of failure. She had told herself for years that fear of failure was what held people back, and she was proud that she didn't have it. She genuinely believed she could handle a bad investment. She had modeled it out. She knew the math of loss recovery. Failure was not the thing. What she had never put words to was this: the moment you decide, you become accountable, not to anyone else, to yourself. The person you are after a real decision is not the same person you were before it. That new person carries weight the old one never had. Before the decision, you are a person with potential. After it, you are a person with a record. And a record can be judged not by others, not primarily, but by the part of you that has been managing expectations about who you might become. Preparation protects that potential. It keeps the future version of you theoretical, perfect, undefeated. The moment you step out of the hallway and into the room, you are subject to real outcomes. Real outcomes are specific. And specificity is where the comfortable story of your own capability gets tested. This is not a character flaw. It is a mechanism. And once you see it as a mechanism, you can stop judging yourself for it and start doing something about it. Down the line in this book, we will reach an idea about the relationship between knowledge and wealth that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that idea snaps into focus, it reshapes how you act from that point forward. But for now, stay with this. The preparation trap has a particular signature. You can feel it if you know what to look for. It shows up as a reason to wait that always sounds logical. The market is volatile right now. My credit score needs 3 more months. I want to understand the tax implications first. I am going to start in January when I have a cleaner slate. Each of these, taken alone, sounds sensible. Strung together over 3 or 4 or 7 years, they form a pattern that is not caution. It is avoidance wearing the clothes of wisdom. There is a difference between the kind of preparation that precedes a decision and the kind that substitutes for one. Real preparation narrows. It gets more specific over time. It converges on a point and builds toward a threshold. Avoidance preparation expands. Every answer generates 2 new questions. Every course reveals another gap in your knowledge. The horizon of readiness keeps moving forward at exactly the pace you walk toward it. You have been chasing that horizon. You already know it. The question is why? Not psychologically, not in some deep excavation of childhood, just practically right now. What is the actual cost you are paying to stay prepared instead of committed? Here is what it costs. Every day you spend in the preparation phase is a day that compound interest, market exposure, actual real estate cash flow, or whatever specific vehicle you have been studying runs without your money in it. The math of that delay is not sentimental. If you are 27 years old and you wait until 32 to begin building toward a meaningful financial foundation, you do not lose 5 years. You lose the compounding effect of those 5 years on every subsequent year. That loss grows larger the longer you delay. The hallway does not hold time still while you stand in it. It spends your time on your behalf and it spends it on nothing. So what does deciding actually look like when it is not preceded by perfect preparation? It looks specific and small and irreversible, not a grand gesture. Not a dramatic pivot, one concrete commitment that you cannot quietly walk back. The size of the action is almost irrelevant at this stage. What matters is its quality, the quality of being done, of belonging to your record, of being the first data point in a new story about who you are and what you do. Elena eventually found this, not from course 10. She found it on a Tuesday afternoon when she closed her laptop and did not open a new tab. She called a local property management company and asked one question: what does a first rental property in this zip code typically require in terms of initial investment? One call. She did not buy anything that day, but she had stepped out of the hallway. The room was the same room it had always been. She was simply finally inside it. The knowledge she had spent 3 years accumulating did not become useful until that moment. Not because the information changed, it hadn't. Because she had. Deciding is not the reward for sufficient preparation. Deciding is the event that makes preparation meaningful. Everything you know right now, every course, every book, every conversation you have had about money, it is sitting in a room waiting for you to enter and put it to work. It cannot organize itself on your behalf. It cannot choose a direction. It cannot make itself useful. Only you can do that, and only one thing allows you to do it. So here is the question this chapter leaves you with. It is the sharpest one in this book so far. What specifically are you waiting to know that you do not already know? Chapter 3. The difference between wanting and deciding. Deciding something does not feel the way you think it does. Most people imagine a real decision arrives with a surge of certainty, a clean emotional signal, maybe some relief. That sounds reasonable. It is almost completely wrong. Real decisions are quieter than that. They do not announce themselves with feeling. They announce themselves with behavior. And the behavior often starts before the feeling catches up. You have heard the word decision so many times that it has gone soft. You use it the way people use the word fine, technically accurate, emptied of meaning. You decided to save more money last January. You decided to start the business 6 months ago. You decided last Tuesday night at 11 o'clock, lying in bed with your phone on your chest, that you were going to be different from this point on. And then morning came and you were not different. Not because you lack discipline, not because you are broken, because what you did last January and 6 months ago and last Tuesday night was not a decision. It was a preference dressed up in decisions clothing. This chapter is about the difference, and once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. Here is the question that will stay open for a while. If you have already made the decision to be wealthy, why is the behavior not already different? Think back to the last time you genuinely could not undo something. A lease you signed. A conversation that changed a relationship permanently. A bridge you crossed and then watched burn behind you, not from destruction, but from the simple passage of what was said out loud. Remember that feeling, not the drama of it, the quality of it, the peculiar stillness. The way the option to go back simply ceased to exist as a living thing in your mind. That stillness is what a real decision feels like from the inside. Wanting does not produce that stillness. Wanting produces motion, urgency, a kind of frantic energy that looks like drive from a distance but feels like anxiety up close. When you want something badly, you are aware of the gap between where you are and where you want to be. That awareness is live and constant. It pulses. It interrupts your sleep. And here is the uncomfortable part. That pulsing gap is a signal that you have not decided. It is a signal that you are still in negotiation with the outcome. Marcus was 29 years old and worked in logistics for a mid-sized regional company in Ohio. Every month for 3 years, he had told anyone who would listen that he was going to start a freight consulting firm. He had the knowledge. He had the contacts. He had a folder on his laptop with 47 pages of market research, rate comparisons, and a rough service model that was, by any honest measure, solid. He had told his girlfriend. He had told his mother. He had told 2 former colleagues over lunch who had both said, without hesitation, that they would send him referrals the day he opened. What Marcus did not have was a single client. When his girlfriend asked him one evening why nothing had started yet, Marcus said he was waiting until he had a clearer picture of the regulatory side. When she asked him 3 months later, he said he was waiting until they had a larger emergency fund. When she asked him a 3rd time, he looked at her for a long moment and said, quietly, that he did not know. That was the first honest thing he had said about it in 3 years. The freight consulting firm that Marcus wanted to start existed in a permanent state of almost. He had never decided to start it. He had decided to want to start it. That is an entirely different act, and it produces entirely different results. The wanting was real. The research was real. The capability was real. None of that was in question. What was missing was the moment where the possibility of not starting ceased to be a live option. Notice what happened to your own thinking just then. There is a way to test any past decision you believe you made. Call it the decision horizon test. Go back to the moment you say you decided something. Then ask yourself one question. At the moment you quote-unquote decided, was not doing the thing still a live option in your mind? Not theoretically. Practically. Could you have woken up the next morning and chosen otherwise without it feeling like a betrayal of something already completed? If the answer is yes, you did not decide. You preferred. And preference, no matter how passionate, no matter how detailed, no matter how many times you say it out loud, does not reorganize behavior. This is why the action plan is not the thing. The villain in most financial advice is the belief that the plan comes first. Get the right strategy. Find the right investment. Learn the right system. And then once everything is aligned, you will act. Here is what that sequence actually produces: more research, more preparation, more almost. Because the plan is something you can always improve. There is always one more thing you do not yet know. There is always a reason to wait until the picture is clearer. And waiting for a clearer picture, which sounds like wisdom, which feels like patience, is the primary mechanism by which people stay exactly where they are for years without ever admitting to themselves that they are choosing to stay. Here is the mirror moment. Take yourself back to your financial footing before these last 3 years moved and look only at the money side. Think about what you told yourself you were going to do, not the vague idea of being better off, the specific thing, the investment, the business, the debt you were going to eliminate, the savings rate you were going to maintain. Now think about whether your behavior actually changed in the weeks and months after that moment. Not eventually, not after something external happened. In the weeks directly following the moment you say you decided. If the behavior did not shift, the decision did not happen. That is not an indictment. It is a diagnosis. You cannot fix what you have not named correctly. A real decision has a before and an after, not a before and an eventually. The after begins immediately, not because of discipline or motivation, because the person on the other side of a real decision is, in a functional sense, different from the person who made it. The options available to them are literally fewer. They have closed a door. Closing the door is the decision. Everything else is just intention standing in front of a door that is still wide open. There is a room that has always been unlocked. You have walked past it hundreds of times. You have stood at the door. You have looked in. You have described the room to other people and gotten excited about what you could do with it. But stepping into that room and letting the door close behind you is not the same act as describing it from the hallway. No matter how vivid the description, most people live in the hallway. They are not failing. They are not unintelligent. They are simply still positioned outside a room they believe they are working toward entering. They do not realize that the moment of entry is not at the end of a process. It is the beginning of one. So what does a real decision actually require? It requires that you stop treating the outcome as conditional. This is harder than it sounds. You have spent years learning to be reasonable. You have been taught to hedge. To say things like, "I hope this works," or "I will give it 6 months and see." Reasonable hedging is a survival skill in many areas of life. In the context of the foundational decision about who you are financially, it is a trap, because every hedge keeps the door open. And an open door means you are still choosing each morning whether to stay in the room. The decision horizon is the moment before which you were one person and after which you became another. Not a better person, not a more motivated person. A person for whom certain options have simply ceased to exist as daily considerations. You do not decide every morning whether to go back. The going back has stopped being a choice your mind presents to you. This is not about willpower. Willpower is what you use when a decision has not actually been made. If you are using willpower to stay committed to something you have not decided, you are still negotiating with yourself, and the willpower is the toll you are paying to stay in a negotiation that should already be over. Marcus eventually had his honest moment, not from discipline, not from a new strategy, not from more research. He had it from exhaustion. 3 years of almost had weight to it. One evening he closed the laptop with the 47 pages still inside it, picked up his phone, and texted one of the former colleagues. The text said 4 words, "I am starting Monday." He did not have more information than he had the week before. The regulatory questions he had been using as an excuse were the same questions they had always been, answerable through the same process that had always been available. Nothing external had changed. What changed was that the option of not starting stopped existing in his mind as a real thing. He did not feel ready. He felt done waiting. Those are not the same sensation, but the second one produces the same behavior that the first one promises. Within 11 months, he had 6 clients. The information was never the obstacle. A little later, you will come to a point about timing that breaks with the story most people inherited, specifically about when the right moment to act arrives. Once that lands, it alters how you move through every week going forward. For now, the only thing you need to hold is this. There is a version of you that is still waiting to know something before you decide. That version is not being cautious. That version is using caution as the furniture it rearranges in the hallway while the room stands open. The test is simple. Apply it to anything you have been calling a decision. Was not doing it still a live option the morning after? If yes, go back and make the actual decision. Not the preference, not the intention, the decision. The one where the door closes and staying in the room stops requiring effort because leaving has stopped feeling possible. Anything you can revisit is not a decision yet. Chapter 4. Why timing feels mystical but isn't. Something is slipping out through the cracks already. It is not dramatic enough for you to notice. There are no sirens, no crisis. The loss arrives the way a slow leak drains a tire, so gradual that you keep driving, keep functioning, keep telling yourself the pressure still feels fine. But every day you spend waiting for the right moment is not a neutral day. It is compounding cost wearing the disguise of patience. The money you are not building right now is not just this month's shortfall. It is the $2,700 that would have become $8,000 over a decade. It is the position, the option, the open door that closes quietly while you stand nearby, perfectly capable, perfectly informed, still waiting. And here is the strange part. You have probably heard exactly what you need to hear before, more than once, maybe many times. The information was never the problem. Something else has been keeping it from landing. Today, that something else has a name. Anything you can revisit is not a decision yet. That line from the previous chapter is not a judgment. It is a description of a specific psychological condition, one that most people live inside for years without ever having a word for it. You know the condition. You have been in it. You gather more information, more strategies, more savings calculators, more videos about compound interest. Every piece of knowledge makes perfect logical sense. None of it moves. You are fluent in the theory of wealth and still standing in the same place. That is not weakness. That is what happens when the door you need to walk through has been in front of you the whole time, and you are waiting for someone to open it from the outside. Here is the question this chapter will hold for a while before it answers. Why does the same information hit one person like a revelation and another like a pleasant reminder they will soon forget? Hold that question. Let it stay uncomfortable, because the answer, when it arrives, will reframe everything that came before it. People use the phrase divine timing as though the universe schedules appointments, as though the right moment is orbiting your life like a satellite, and when the path aligns, something clicks and you are finally ready. It is a beautiful idea. It is also not what happens. What people call divine timing is almost never about the calendar, the planets, the economic cycle, or the phase of the moon. It is interior. It is something shifting inside you that makes the same words land differently. The timing was not divine. You were different. That is the whole explanation. And it sounds simple. And it is not simple at all, because if you accept it, you have to ask a harder question. What exactly changed inside you, and can you make it change deliberately? Return to the season you were in from 3 years back, as it really was. Not in terms of income or address, in terms of how you thought about money when no one was watching. The private conversation you had with yourself when the bank app loaded, when a bill arrived, when someone mentioned buying something you wanted and could not yet afford. What was the texture of that inner conversation? Was it heavy? Was it resigned? Was there a quiet background assumption that said something like, "This is just how it is for people like me"? You do not have to answer out loud, but notice whether that assumption is still running. Notice whether it has simply gotten better at hiding. That private conversation is the mechanism, not the economy, not your salary, not your family background, which matters enormously but does not have the final word. The internal running commentary about what money means, what you deserve, what is realistic, that commentary determines which pieces of information you absorb as instruction and which ones you absorb as entertainment. A woman named Celeste had heard the phrase "pay yourself first" roughly a dozen times before it changed her life. She heard it in a financial literacy class at 22. She read it in a book at 25. A coworker mentioned it over lunch. She nodded, thought, "Yes, I should really do that," and ordered her food. Then one Tuesday evening at 28, she was sitting on her kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator. She had just opened a credit card statement that made her feel physically ill. She put on a podcast mostly to fill the silence. Pay yourself first. Something cracked open. She did not suddenly understand the words differently. She had understood them years ago. What changed was that she had finally run out of the thing she had been substituting for action. She had run out of the belief that things would gradually improve without a specific, irrevocable choice. The information did not change. Celeste changed. She opened a new savings account that night, automated a transfer she genuinely could not afford to ignore, and did not touch it. That was 4 years ago. She has not been back to the kitchen floor. Notice what did not happen in that story. No one gave Celeste new information. No mentor appeared. No windfall created room for her to finally start. The data was the same data it had always been. What changed was her interior readiness. The specific psychological state where a person stops receiving wisdom as theory and starts receiving it as instruction. That state has a name in behavioral psychology. It is called the action threshold. Every person carries one. Almost no one talks about how to lower it on purpose. Your action threshold is the internal level of urgency, clarity, and self-permission you need before you will move on something you already know you should do. When the threshold is high, you can be brilliant, informed, motivated in the short term, and still find yourself years later with the same savings balance and the same shelf of unread books. When the threshold drops, the same information you have carried for years suddenly feels less like knowledge and more like a directive. You stop filing it under good ideas. You start filing it under what I am doing now. The threshold drops when something specific happens inside you, not to you, inside you. This is where people get confused. From the outside, it can look like external events caused the change. Celeste's moment looked like a credit card statement caused her shift, but the statement was not the cause. The statement was the last ounce of weight on a scale that had been slowly tipping for years. The cause was a slow, private accumulation of evidence that the old approach was not going to produce a different result. The statement just made that evidence undeniable. What most people are actually waiting for, when they say they are waiting for the right moment, is for external circumstances to drop their internal threshold for them. They are waiting for the crisis, the catalyst, the rock bottom, the dramatic turning point that will make the decision feel unavoidable. And sometimes that crisis comes. Sometimes it does the work by force. But here is what that strategy costs you: the years between now and the crisis. Those years are not free. Those years are the compounding cost from the opening of this chapter, quietly running daily, invisibly subtracting from what your life could become. You can lower the threshold without waiting for the crisis. That is not a motivational claim. It is a practical one, because the threshold drops when you do one specific thing, not gather more information, not visualize success, not create a 5-year plan. The threshold drops when you stop treating wealth as a destination you are navigating toward and start treating it as an identity you are already inside, not performing, not aspiring toward. Inside. This is the room that was always unlocked. The door you kept studying, measuring, researching, it was never locked. It opened when you touched it. The thing keeping you in the hallway was not a locked door. It was the belief that you needed better credentials before you were allowed to reach for the handle. Now close the loop on the question from earlier. Why does the same information hit one person like a revelation and another like a pleasant reminder? The answer is interior readiness. The person who receives information as revelation has cleared the internal barrier that was filing new ideas under theory instead of instruction. Their threshold was low enough for the idea to fall all the way through into action. That is not luck. That is not divine timing in any mystical sense. It is a specific internal condition. And now that you can name it, you can ask a very different question. The question is not, when will the right moment come? The question is, what is keeping my threshold high? Because the moment you can answer that honestly, you are no longer waiting for timing. You are working on the one variable that has always been in your control. You have already heard everything you need to know to build a different financial life. You heard some of it years ago. You are hearing some of it right now. The difference between this time and every previous time is not the quality of the information. It is whether you are standing at a threshold low enough to let the instruction fall all the way through. Further on, you will come to a point about motivation. Specifically, the belief that feeling ready must come before acting that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that contradiction resolves, it will change not just how you think about starting, but how you think about the whole sequence. For now, hold this. The right moment was never coming from outside. It was waiting for you to stop asking the universe for permission and recognize that the door you have been studying has been open the entire time. Chapter 5. What the body does after the real decision. Deciding to be wealthy makes you less effective at getting there. That sounds like a reason to close this book and stop trying. It is not. It is a precise observation about the difference between wanting wealth and choosing it. Once you understand that difference in your body, not just in your head, you will recognize that everything you have read up to this point has been building toward a single moment. A moment you may have already crossed without knowing it. So stay here. The question worth asking right now is not whether you have made the decision. The question is whether you would even recognize it if you had. Most people would not. That is not a failure of awareness. It is a failure of information. You stepped through a door. The room was always unlocked. This chapter answers one simple and strange question. What happens to your body after you walk in? There is a man named Carlos. He worked as a shift supervisor at a distribution warehouse outside of Columbus, Ohio. He was 28 years old. He had one savings account with $400 in it, a used sedan with a slow oil leak, and a habit of reading financial articles late at night on his phone before falling asleep. He read about index funds, compound interest, real estate leverage, and tax strategy. He knew a great deal. He changed almost nothing. For 2 years, Carlos read and researched and nodded and felt informed. Then one Tuesday in November, he sat in his car during a lunch break and felt something he could not name. Not inspiration, not excitement, something quieter. He said to himself, not out loud but with a finality that surprised him, that his life from this point would be organized around building something real, not around hoping, not around learning more, around building. He did not start a business that afternoon. He did not open a brokerage account that evening. He went back inside and finished his shift. But here is what happened next. Carlos started sleeping differently. He did not plan this. His body simply began waking up earlier, not from an alarm but from a low hum of readiness that replaced the old static of worry. The first thoughts of his morning, which had previously circled around what was wrong, began circling around what was possible, not in a dreamy way, in a practical, almost mechanical way. His brain was scanning for openings instead of cataloging threats. Within 3 weeks, 2 opportunities appeared. He later said they had probably been in front of him for months. A coworker mentioned his cousin was selling a rental property below market value. A manager mentioned an opening in logistics coordination that paid 30% more than his current role. Carlos had worked alongside these people for over a year. He had simply not registered the signals. He applied for the position. He called the cousin. Both calls led somewhere, and Carlos will tell you with genuine honesty that nothing in his external world changed in the weeks between that Tuesday and those phone calls. What changed was what he was looking for. Picture the season you were in from 3 years back as it really was. Not the version of you who was trying to improve. The version of you who was waiting for a better situation to arrive before you took yourself seriously. Picture the specific texture of that waiting. The low-grade sense that somewhere ahead of you conditions would finally align, that you would feel ready, that the right information would arrive and remove all uncertainty. Feel how familiar that texture is. Now notice whether some version of it is still present today. This is not an accusation. It is a mirror. The thing that changes after a genuine decision is not your motivation. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are weather. What changes is your perceptual filter. Your brain processes 11 million bits of information every second. You are consciously aware of roughly 40 of them. The rest is filtered out not because it is unimportant, but because your brain has decided it is irrelevant to your current survival priorities. The reticular activating system, a cluster of neurons at the base of your brainstem, performs this filtration around the clock. It is the reason you suddenly see your car model everywhere after you buy one. Not because more of them appeared on the road, because your brain reclassified that model as personally relevant and stopped discarding those signals. This is not metaphor. This is anatomy. When you make a genuine decision, not a wish dressed as a decision but an irrevocable internal declaration about who you are now, your reticular activating system receives a reclassification order. Wealth-adjacent signals, which your brain previously filed under not relevant to you, begin routing upward into conscious awareness. The conversation happening 3 seats away at the coffee shop. The offhand comment from a contact on a phone call. The problem a neighbor mentions that you realize you know how to solve and that other people would pay to have solved. These were always there. You were not equipped to receive them. Carlos was not lucky. Carlos reclassified himself. This is why wanting wealth does not work the same way that choosing it does. When you want something, your brain maintains it in the category of things that belong to other people and might someday belong to you. Desire without declaration keeps the filter closed. Your brain is still organized around your old identity, the one that watches wealth from the outside. But the moment you declare without condition, without a timeline requirement, without waiting for external confirmation, that you are now a person who builds wealth, the filter reclassifies. What was noise becomes signal. You do not have to force this, but you do have to recognize it when it starts. If you don't, you will attribute the new signals to coincidence and return to your previous posture of waiting. There is something else that happens after the real decision. It is more subtle than the perceptual shift. Your energy changes, not in the broad, vague way that word gets used, in a specific way. Before the decision, a significant portion of your mental energy goes toward the debate, toward the ongoing negotiation your mind holds about whether you are capable, whether conditions are right, whether now is the moment. This negotiation is exhausting and almost entirely invisible to you. You have been running it for so long it feels like background. It feels like just how thinking works. After the decision, the debate closes. That is the only way to say it. The question of whether you are someone who builds wealth stops being a question. The energy that was feeding the debate becomes available for something else, for observation, for planning that feels grounded rather than anxious, for noticing the room you just walked into. This is why people who have made the real decision often describe a period shortly after as feeling unusually clear. Not euphoric, clear. Like a low-grade noise they had adapted to is suddenly gone and the silence is notable. Some people mistake that clarity for complacency. They force themselves back into worry to feel like they are taking things seriously. This is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make. Let the silence stand. That silence is the sound of your brain reorienting. Do not fill it with manufactured urgency. The urgency will arrive naturally, attached to actual opportunities, when the filter opens and signals begin coming through. Now let's close the loop that has been sitting open since the first paragraph of this chapter. The reason deciding to be wealthy often makes people less effective is that most people who say they have decided have actually only agreed to want it more intensely. They have turned up the voltage on their desire without making the internal declaration that reclassifies their identity. High-voltage desire without declaration produces anxiety, not action. It produces the feeling of chasing without the clarity of pursuit. It produces more research, more hesitation, more waiting for the moment to feel right. And here is the bitter truth about that wait. Soon, you will come to a point about the right moment to begin that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that becomes clear, it alters how you act the next time you feel yourself stalling. But for now, understand this. The decision horizon is real. There is a before and an after. On one side, you are a person to whom wealth might eventually happen. On the other side, you are a person around whom wealth is already organizing itself. Not because the universe rewarded your belief, because your brain finally received permission to see what was always there. The door was not locked. You were standing in front of it with your eyes closed, reading articles about door mechanisms. Carlos went back to work after that Tuesday and finished his shift. He did not announce anything. He did not tell his coworker or his manager that something had changed. But something had changed. The world he walked through on Wednesday was measurably different from the world he had walked through the previous Monday. Not because any external fact had shifted. Because his brain had started routing different signals into his conscious awareness. Your brain is waiting for the same instruction. Not a wish. Not a resolution. not a detailed 5-year plan, a declaration so quiet and final that the debate stops, and after that you do not need to search for what to do next. You will simply begin to see it. Chapter 6. The wealth decision is not about money. Every day you spend waiting for the numbers to be right is not a waiting day. It is a cost day. The gap between what you earn and what you could be building is not staying the same size. It is widening. Every month that passes without the foundational decision is not a neutral month. It is a month where the version of you who already made that decision is pulling further ahead, not because that person is smarter, not because they had better luck or a warmer introduction or a number in their account that gave them permission to begin. They pulled ahead because of one thing that had nothing to do with money at all. And the strange, almost irritating truth is that you can do that exact same thing right now. Sitting exactly where you are, with exactly what you have. This chapter is going to show you what that thing is, not in a vague way, in a way that lands and stays. You already know that seeing comes before doing. The previous chapter ended with a specific promise that once the internal alignment is real, you will not need to search for what to do next. You will simply begin to see it. But here is the question that demands a real answer now. What exactly creates that alignment? What is the thing that actually happens inside a person before the seeing begins? That question matters more than any other question in this book. Let it sit for a moment. Revisit the season you were in from 3 years back as it really was. Not financially, deeper than that. Think about who you believed yourself to be in relation to money. Think about how you talked about it, how you felt when the subject came up, whether you thought of wealth as something that happened to certain kinds of people. People who were categorically different from you in some way you could not quite name but could feel clearly. 3 years ago, was the idea of being wealthy something that felt like a real possibility for a specific person named you? Or was it an idea that lived in a far room, a room you could admire through the window but had no business walking into? Be honest. This is only between you and you. Most people, if they answer that question honestly, discover something uncomfortable. The room was never locked. It was never guarded by income requirements or approved credentials or the right circumstances. The room was open. The door was open. And they stood outside it for years, convinced that there were conditions they had not yet met. Conditions that were always just slightly out of reach. Conditions that kept being revised upward every time they came close. That is not bad luck. That is not even weakness. That is a precise and predictable result of a belief that almost nobody examines because it sounds like wisdom. The belief sounds like this: I am waiting until I understand it better. I am waiting until I have more to work with. I am waiting for the right moment. It sounds like patience. It sounds like prudence. It sounds like the responsible approach of someone who does not want to make a mistake. In Act 1 of almost every financial story that stays stuck, that belief is presented as a virtue. It takes until much later, sometimes decades later, to see it for what it actually is. It is not patience. It is the primary mechanism that keeps people financially exactly where they are, no matter how much time passes. You will encounter more about this mechanism later in this book. When you do, you will see something about the waiting instinct that directly contradicts what most people believe about timing and readiness. The way that contradiction resolves will change how you decide. For now, stay with Alina. You have met Alina before in these pages. You know where she started. But there is a specific moment in her story that has not been told yet. It is the most important part. Alina was 31. She had a decent job managing client accounts at a mid-sized logistics firm. She was not struggling in the way that word usually implies. She paid her bills. She had a small savings account she barely touched. She had a life that looked, from the outside, like someone doing reasonably well. But she was stuck. Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet, exhausting way where each year looks almost exactly like the year before, where the raises are real but small, where the savings grow by a little, but the years are also growing. The math between those two facts was something she tried not to look at too directly. 𝗓𝗓𝗧 had a notebook. She had been keeping it for almost 4 years. In it were business ideas, money goals written out in careful handwriting, names of books she was going to read, courses she was going to take, dates she was going to start. The notebook was detailed. It was organized. It was one of the most complete portraits of a person waiting that you could ever read. The conflict in 𝗓𝗓𝗧's story was not that she lacked information or drive or even the raw material to do something different. The conflict was a single unexamined belief she carried the way you carry tension in your shoulders, so constant you stop noticing it is there. The belief was this: she was the kind of person who was still preparing. Then one Tuesday in November, nothing dramatic happened. She did not receive news. She did not have a crisis or a revelation or a conversation that changed everything. She was on the train home from work. She opened the notebook. She looked at the date she had written on an idea 2 years earlier, and she did something she had never quite done before. She stayed with that date. She held it. She let the full weight of it arrive. 2 years. The same idea. The same hesitation. The same list of things she needed to do first. And she understood, not as a thought but as a physical fact in her chest, that the notebook was not a plan. The notebook was a substitute for a decision. It was evidence that she had been, for 4 years, performing the feelings of someone becoming wealthy without becoming the person who was. She closed the notebook. The next day, she did not do anything extraordinary. She did not quit her job or wire money anywhere or sign up for a program. What she stopped doing was more significant than anything she started. She stopped writing things down as future intentions. She stopped treating her financial life as something she was building toward. She started treating it as something she was already responsible for right now, with exactly the numbers she currently had. That is an unglamorous moment. It does not have a soundtrack. Nobody noticed. But the before and after of that Tuesday on the train is the sharpest line in 𝗓𝗓𝗧's story. Everything after it is directionally different from everything before it. Not because her circumstances changed immediately, because she changed what she was. That is the revelation this chapter carries. Deciding to be wealthy is not a financial decision. It is an identity claim. It is the moment you stop being the kind of person who is preparing to build wealth and become the kind of person who generates, keeps, and grows value right now, with right now's resources in right now's life. Money follows that. Money is the receipt, not the decision. The receipt arrives after the transaction. The transaction is the claim you make about what kind of person you are. This sounds simple. It is not easy. Because the identity claim requires you to stop holding your current self at arm's length while you wait for the improved version to arrive. It requires you to say, without irony, without asterisks, without the silent footnote that starts with the word once, I am the person who manages money with intention. I am the person who builds slowly and deliberately and does not wait for permission. I am the person for whom the room is not somewhere else. The room is here. The room is now. The door has been open the entire time. Most people resist this not because it seems too hard, but because it seems too small. Where is the strategy? Where is the system? Where is the plan with the numbered steps and the spreadsheet and the exact allocation percentages? This feels like a thought exercise, not a real move. But consider what Alina's notebook taught her. 4 years of strategy. 4 years of numbered steps and detailed intentions. 4 years of collecting the right information, writing the right plans, and genuinely intending, to execute. None of it moved until the identity shifted. The strategy was always there. What was missing was the person willing to own it in real time. Strategy without identity is just content. When you make the real decision, not the intention, not the goal setting, not the hopeful projection into next year, you become a different kind of consumer of information. The same book you read 6 months ago will suddenly yield 3 things you could not see before, because you are reading it as someone who is already responsible for the outcome, not as someone studying for an exam they have not yet signed up to take. This is the invisible mechanism that the loss at the beginning of this chapter was pointing at. You are not losing money because you lack information. You are losing compounding time because the person who would act on good information has not fully arrived yet. And the thing that delays that person's arrival is not circumstance. It is the quiet, daily, invisible choice to keep treating the decision as something that needs more conditions before it can be real. Here is the open loop that has been running since the 2nd paragraph of this chapter. The question was, what exactly creates the alignment? What is the thing that happens inside a person before the seeing begins? The answer is arrival, not arrival at a destination, arrival in yourself. The moment you stop auditioning for the role of someone who might one day deserve wealth, and instead claim the responsibilities of the person who already is building it, the seeing begins. Not because the world changed, because you are finally looking at the world from the right position. Alina still has the notebook. She uses it differently now. It is not a collection of futures. It is a record of presence. What she decided today, what she moved today, what she is already doing with the money and time she has right now. The decision is not about money. The money is just proof that the decision was real. What would change in your daily choices tomorrow if the decision were already made, not planned, not intended, but made and done and settled, and you were simply the person you decided to be? Chapter 7. The quiet drain you cannot see. The decisions you have not made yet are costing you more than the ones you made wrong. That sounds like the kind of thing someone says when they want you to slow down and think more carefully. It is not. It is an observation about where your actual energy goes. Not to your work, not to your relationships, not to the financial moves you keep meaning to make, but to the invisible maintenance of thousands of questions you left open and never returned to. Every single one of them is still running in the background right now. The cost is not occasional. The cost is continuous. You know what this feels like. You have felt it every time you sat down to do something that mattered and found yourself strangely flat, not tired, not distracted by anything you could name. Just slightly less sharp than you needed to be, slightly less present than the moment deserved. You called it a bad day, you called it stress, you called it not being a morning person, but some portion of that flatness had a different cause entirely. That cause has a name: open loops. There is a question this chapter will not answer immediately. You will notice when it is answered because something will click into place. The question is this: why do people who finally make the decision they have been avoiding for months report feeling lighter within hours, even when the decision was hard and the outcome uncertain? Hold that question. The answer is not what you expect. Call up the season you were in from 3 years back as it really was. Not geographically, not professionally, emotionally. Think about the things that were weighing on you then. The decisions that felt too large, too risky, or too final to actually make. How many of those decisions are still unmade? How many did you simply move from one year to the next, carrying the question like furniture you never put down, just shifted from one shoulder to the other? Here is what nobody told you about that carrying. It is not neutral. It is not merely inconvenient. Every unmade decision is using resources that belong to the version of you who is trying to build something real. Marcos was 31 when his sister first asked him to go into business with her. She had a catering operation that was growing faster than she could manage alone. She needed a partner, someone to handle logistics while she handled the food. Marcos was working a stable job he did not love. The catering idea was not glamorous, but the numbers made sense. He told her he would think about it. He thought about it for 14 months, not 14 months of research, not 14 months of careful due diligence, 14 months of what he later called carrying it around. He would think about it while driving. He would half engage with it while trying to watch television. He would bring it to the edge of a real decision and then find a reason to set it down again. He needed more information. The timing wasn't quite right. He wanted to see how the business looked in a different season. His sister eventually found another partner. The question dissolved on its own. Marcos felt a strange relief for about a week. Then the relief faded, and then he noticed something he hadn't expected. He still felt the same level of flatness he'd felt throughout those 14 months, because it wasn't really the question about his sister that had been draining him. It was the 30 other unmade decisions sitting in the same queue that he had never addressed. The catering question had just been the one he could see. This is what the research on cognitive load consistently shows, even if the research rarely frames it in terms you find useful. Your mind does not distinguish between a decision you are actively working on and a decision you are passively deferring. To your brain, an unresolved question is an unresolved question. It stays tagged. It stays active. It keeps pulling a small but constant portion of your attention, no matter what else you are trying to do. Psychologists call this the Zygarnik effect. Unfinished tasks occupy mental space that finished tasks do not. But the Zygarnik effect was measured in labs on simple tasks over short periods. The version you are living is not a short-period lab study. You have been running open loops for years. Every unmade decision is an open loop consuming cognitive resources. Closing them, even with a no, returns that energy immediately. That is the mechanism. Simple, almost insultingly simple, but understanding the mechanism is not the same as feeling it work. So here is the exercise. It requires honesty more than time. Take a category of your life. Financial decisions are the right place to start for our purposes, though this extends everywhere. Inside that category, ask yourself which decisions you are currently carrying, not the decisions you made and are executing, not the goals you are actively pursuing, the decisions you have been meaning to make, the investment you keep saying you will research, the account you told yourself you would set up last year, the freelance work you have been considering but have not committed to or ruled out. The business idea that lives in the back of your mind like a house guest who never quite leaves and never quite unpacks. Write them down, or say them aloud. Just name them. You do not have to resolve them right now. You just have to see them. Because until you see them, you cannot make a fair accounting of where your energy is actually going. You look at your week and say you are working hard, and you are. But you are also spending hours, not blocked together, not obvious, but real accumulated hours, in the low-grade maintenance of questions you have been unwilling to close. That maintenance does not show up on any schedule. It lives in the slight hesitation before you start something new. It lives in the scrolling that happens when you meant to plan. It lives in the conversation about money you almost have and then don't. Now here is where the motif this book has been building becomes something you can actually feel. There is a room that was always unlocked. You have passed by it many times. You know the room exists. You have even stood in the doorway, but you have never walked fully inside, because inside that room is the version of your financial life that requires you to stop treating the decision as pending. The door was never locked. It has always been open. The only thing that kept you standing in the hallway was the collection of other open doors down the corridor, all those other rooms, all those other unmade decisions. Each one pulling just enough of your attention to prevent you from stepping into the one that mattered. Closing the rooms you are not going to enter is not giving up. It is clearing the hallway so you can finally move. This is what people mean when they report feeling lighter after a hard decision, even when the outcome is still uncertain. The lightness is not relief from the outcome. The outcome is still unknown. The lightness comes from the closure of the loop itself. The brain stops tagging the question as active. It stops allocating resources to a file it now knows is resolved. And those resources return, sometimes slowly, sometimes with a sudden clarity that surprises you, to the work that is actually in front of you. That is the answer to the question from the beginning of this chapter. People feel lighter not because the decision led somewhere good. They feel lighter because the carrying is over. And this connects directly to what this book has been building toward. You have been told in small ways by the culture you absorbed that waiting is a form of wisdom, that the right moment will become obvious if you are patient enough, that the responsible thing is to gather more information before committing. Some small portion of that is true in specific circumstances, for specific types of decisions where more information genuinely changes the calculus. But most of the decisions you are carrying are not waiting on information. They are waiting on permission. Permission you are waiting to receive from a future version of yourself who feels more certain, more ready, more established. The problem is that the future version of yourself is being assembled right now. Out of the choices the current version of you makes today. And if the current version of you is operating at partial capacity because of accumulated open loops, the future version of you starts at a deficit before they even begin. Later on, you will come to a point about motivation that breaks with the story most people inherited. After that clicks, it alters how you act every morning. For now, return to the exercise. Take the list you made, or the list forming in your mind. Look at each item and ask one single question. Am I going to do this or am I not? Not someday. Not eventually. Not when the conditions improve. Now. If the answer is yes, put a date on it. Not a vague intention, a date. If the answer is no, say no out loud. Let it be finished. Give yourself the resource back. If the answer is genuinely uncertain because you need one specific piece of information, name that piece of information and decide when you will get it. Then it becomes a task instead of a question. Tasks have a different relationship to your energy than questions do. This is the decision audit. It is not complicated. It is just uncommon. Because most people prefer the comfort of maybe to the finality of yes or no. Maybe feels like keeping options open, but you are not keeping options open. You are spending energy to maintain the illusion of options while the real options, the ones that require your full attention and your full capacity, Sit waiting for a version of you that never quite arrives. The decision horizon exists. You have been close to it before. You may have stood at it and turned back. You called the turning back wisdom. You called it patience. You called it not yet. But the door was always there. It was always unlocked. Every piece of energy you reclaim from an unmade decision is energy that belongs, finally, to the future you have been too drained to build. What would you be capable of doing tomorrow if you walked through the door today? Chapter 8. The moment you can't unknow this. Something is leaving you right now, and it has no sound. Not money exactly. Not yet. What is leaving you is the version of tomorrow that was still possible yesterday. Every 24 hours spent inside a life organized around waiting for the right time, the right amount, the right feeling of readiness is not a neutral day added to the calendar. It is a compound loss. The decision you did not make today does not stay frozen, waiting for you to return. It moves. It drifts. It recedes the way a shore recedes when you are at sea and the current is working against you, even when the water feels still. You do not feel the drift. That is the mechanism. That is the part no one told you. The cost of waiting appears on no statement, no balance, no account you can check. It lives in the invisible gap between who you are and who you would already be if you had decided. This chapter is about closing that gap, not with a plan, with a door. A question from the last chapter is still with us and left it unresolved. What would you be capable of doing tomorrow if you walked through the door today? Hold on to that. This chapter is going to show you what the door actually is. Once you see it clearly, you will never be able to unsee it. Here is the open loop, and it matters. There is a specific moment, a precise internal event, that separates people who eventually build financial lives they are proud of from people who spend decades trying and arriving back at the same place. It is not discipline. It is not information. It is not the right opportunity arriving at the right time. You will find out what it is before this chapter ends. But first, you need to understand something about how your own mind has been protecting you. Bring to mind the season you were in from 3 years back as it really was, not in some vague emotional sense. Specifically, what were you worried about? What were you telling yourself you needed before you could move? What were you waiting to feel before you gave yourself permission to act? Now look at where those 3 years went. Were they years of gathering, of building, of becoming? Or were they years of circling the same questions from slightly different angles, arriving at the same conclusion that now is not quite right, but soon will be? You do not have to say that right now, but you do have to notice it, because that noticing is the beginning of the only thing that actually changes anything. The mind is extraordinarily good at presenting delay as wisdom. It does this because delay is safe, and the mind is a safety machine above all else. It will dress waiting in the language of patience. It will call hesitation discernment. It will point to all the things you still need to learn, all the conditions not yet quite right, all the reasonable ways that moving forward carries risk while waiting carries none. This is one of the most convincing lies the human mind tells. Waiting does carry cost, enormous, compounding, invisible cost, but because that cost never appears on a single day as a catastrophic loss, the mind does not flag it as danger. It registers as nothing, as ordinary, as just the way things are right now. Meet a man named Desmond. He was 31 years old and he had been saving to start a small importing business for 4 years. Not casually saving, seriously saving. Spreadsheets, projections, a folder on his computer labeled Year 1 plan that he had revised 11 times. He knew the suppliers. He knew the margins. He had done the research with the kind of thoroughness that would impress anyone, and every 6 months something shifted in his calculations and he decided to wait another 6 months. The dollar was too strong, then an election year made him nervous, then a family expense. Then the margins looked thinner than expected and he needed to research that further. 4 years, 11 versions of the same plan, and the business did not exist. Desmond was not lazy. He was not afraid in any way he could identify as fear. He was thorough. He was responsible. He was doing exactly what intelligence told him to do. Then one afternoon, his younger brother started a similar business on a phone call and a handshake. No spreadsheet, no folder, considerably less knowledge about importing than Desmond had. Within 14 months, his brother's operation was generating enough income to matter. Desmond sat with that for a long time, not with jealousy, with something harder to name. What he finally said was this. He decided he was doing it. That was the whole difference. He decided and I was still deciding. That sentence is not about confidence. It is not about courage in the cinematic sense. It is about a specific internal event that Desmond's brother had and Desmond had not yet had. A declaration, not to anyone else, to himself, quiet, irreversible, and complete. The kind of declaration that does not require conditions to be met first, because the declaration itself is the condition. This is the decision horizon. You have heard that phrase before in this book. Here is what it means in the most precise terms possible. The decision horizon is the moment before which you were someone who might do it, and after which you are someone who is doing it. Before the horizon, your identity is organized around possibility. After it, your identity is organized around direction. Here is what almost no one tells you about the difference between those two positions. They do not feel dramatically different on the day. The horizon does not announce itself with fire or ceremony. You do not wake up the morning after the decision feeling like a different person in some overwhelming emotional sense. But the architecture underneath has changed. Every subsequent choice, what to research, who to call, where to put attention, gets rooted differently. Because it is now being rooted by someone who has decided, rather than someone who is still deciding. This is why the belief that wealth begins with the right action plan is the specific villain of financial delay. A plan is a beautiful thing. You should have one. But a plan created by someone who has not yet decided is a document of hope. It gets revised. It waits for conditions. It sits in a folder with version numbers. The same plan created after the decision is a working document. It gets used, corrected in real time, adjusted by contact with the actual world. The plan did not change. The person holding it changed. And that change was not gradual. It happened at the horizon. Here is the part that makes this irreversible once you understand it. Before you heard this described, you could defer without knowing you were deferring. The deferral had no label. It felt like responsible waiting, like due diligence, like being smart about timing. That was the escape route. That was what the unlocked room had been offering you, the comfort of feeling careful rather than the discomfort of seeing that you were standing still. But now you have a name for it. Delay dressed as preparation. Waiting dressed as wisdom. Once you know the name of the thing, it cannot hide from you the same way again. This is the moment you cannot unknow. You now understand how the decision works. Not emotionally, not motivationally, mechanically. You understand that there is a before and an after. You understand that the after is not created by circumstances improving. It is created by a single internal event that precedes every action and makes those actions real rather than rehearsed. You understand that the room was always unlocked. You understand that every version of not yet was not waiting for something to arrive. It was the active choice to stay outside, and you cannot go back to not understanding that. The escape route is closed. Does that feel like pressure? Good. Pressure is not the enemy here. Pressure is just clarity with stakes attached. What comes next in this book is something you need to be prepared for. The next 2 chapters move into territory more personal than anything you have encountered so far. As this book keeps moving, you will come to a point about who is allowed to build wealth that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once you see the contradiction, it will resolve in a way that changes how you behave in specific, ordinary moments of every day, not just in moments of big financial decision. But before you get there, you need to understand what you have already done by making it this far. You have not simply collected information. Each chapter of this book has been constructing something in you, a different way of seeing the situation you are in, a different language for describing what has been happening and why. And language matters more than most people realize. You cannot act against the story you are telling yourself. You can only act from within it. The chapters ahead will give you a story that is more accurate, more useful, and more true to how wealth actually gets built than anything the culture around you has handed you. But those chapters will only work for someone who has reached the decision horizon. Someone still in the comfortable waiting room will read those words and file them under interesting. Someone who has stepped through the door will read those words and immediately know what to do with them. You are being told this so you can choose which person you are when you arrive there. The decision mechanism is now visible to you. Delay cannot pretend to be patience anymore. Chapter 9. Waiting for the right moment was the wrong move. Every civilization that has left a record behind contains the same quiet tragedy. Not war, not famine, not the collapse of great things. The tragedy is the ordinary person who stood at the edge of something real and waited. They waited for the stars to agree, for the elders to approve, for the season to feel right, for the fear in their chest to go away first. This pattern is older than any language you have ever spoken. And here is the tension inside it. The ones who waited were not cowards. They were often the most thoughtful people in the room, which makes what you are about to hear more important, not less. Waiting has never felt like a mistake while you are doing it. It has always felt like wisdom. And that feeling, that quiet, reasonable, responsible feeling, is the most expensive habit you have ever had. You have been practicing it your whole life. By the end of this chapter, you will never be able to look at a waiting moment the same way again. The decision mechanism is now visible to you. Delay cannot pretend to be patience anymore. So let's name what has actually been happening. Think about a moment sometime in the last 3 years when you were close to something. A conversation you almost started, a decision you nearly made, an account you were going to open, a call you were going to make, a number you were going to write down and commit to. You could feel the edge of it. And then something happened. Not a disaster. Not a sign from the world that it was wrong. Just the quiet, internal return to the familiar. You told yourself you needed more time, more information, a better plan. Life continued. The moment passed. You filed it somewhere in the back of your mind under soon. Here is what soon actually is. Soon is a container you invented so that the discomfort of deciding could go somewhere without you having to call it what it is. Now hold that thought. There is a question underneath this chapter that needs to stay open for a while. The question is not whether you have been waiting. You already know the answer to that. The real question is what exactly you have been voting for every single time you did. We will get there. But first, meet Diane. Diane worked in a city planning office for 11 years. She was good at her job, genuinely good, the kind of person her supervisor quietly depended on while publicly overlooking. For 9 of those 11 years, Diane had a folder on her laptop called Someday. Inside it were notes for a small consulting business she wanted to build, helping small municipalities redesign their public spaces. She had the knowledge. She had contacts. She had, by her own admission, everything she needed except the right moment to start. She was waiting for her student loans to hit a certain number. Then she was waiting to feel less tired. Then she was waiting for her lease to come up for renewal so she would have a natural break point. The folder grew. The loans changed. The lease renewed. 3 times. In year 11, a colleague with fewer credentials and less experience launched almost exactly the same consulting practice. That colleague had no folder. She had a bad first proposal, an awkward first client, and a second client 3 weeks later. Diane did not feel angry. She felt something quieter and harder. She felt recognized. Not recognized by anyone else. Recognized by herself. The folder on her laptop had never been a business plan. It had been a monument to the moment she chose not to decide. The colleague who launched badly and moved forward anyway had not beaten Diane with skill. She had beaten her with one act that Diane kept postponing. That act was the decision itself. Go back to the season you were in from 3 years back, as it really was. Not the circumstances, the version of you that existed then. How many things were you waiting for that are still waiting? How many plans are older now than you expected them to be? The folder may not live on a laptop. It might live in a conversation you keep almost having with yourself late at night. The container changes. The habit is always the same. Here is where hope arrives, and it is not soft hope. It is structural. Every wait you have performed was a decision. That is the thing nobody tells you directly. Waiting is not neutral. Every time you return to soon, your brain registered a vote. Over days and months and years, those votes accumulated into an identity. Not the identity you described to yourself, but the identity your actions actually wrote. The person who waits for readiness before deciding. The person for whom wealth begins somewhere in the future, past some unmarked threshold where conditions finally cooperate. That identity has been running your financial life. And here is the revelation that has been building across every chapter of this book. The right moment does not exist before the decision. The right moment is created by the decision. The conditions you were waiting for were never going to arrive first, because conditions follow the committed mind, not the other way around. Every single wait was not a pause before the real beginning. Every wait was the old identity casting a vote for its own continuation. This is the callback you have been circling since the first chapter. You heard early in this book that waiting for the right moment is wise, practical, prudent. You were told to gather information, to plan, to prepare. And all of that is true up to a point. But the point was crossed a long time ago for most people. For you, possibly, the point was crossed years back. The information was gathered. The plan was drafted. And still the decision did not land because the real obstacle was never information. The real obstacle was the identity that kept insisting it needed one more thing before it could begin. Now close the loop. What you have been voting for every time you waited is this. You voted for the belief that you are the kind of person who becomes wealthy after the conditions cooperate, rather than the kind of person whose decision is itself the first condition. That is not a character flaw. It is a mechanism. And mechanisms can be seen. Mechanisms can be interrupted. The room was always unlocked. That image has been in this book since near the beginning. The room that required no key, only the willingness to push the door. Waiting was you standing in front of an unlocked door, studying the architecture, measuring the light, planning the best angle of entry, while the room sat empty and available and entirely yours. The person you are deciding to become does not wait for conditions. That person understands that the condition is the decision. The before and after of any financial life are not separated by a plan, or a market, or a job title, or a number in an account. They are separated by a single interior moment. The moment where you stop being the person who is about to begin and become the person who has already begun. You are one chapter from the end of this book. What will you do with the next moment that asks you to wait? Chapter 10. This audiobook found you on time. You are still here. That is not a small thing. 9 chapters in and you did not put this down. Not when the ideas got uncomfortable. Not when the mirror got close. Not when the truth about waiting, that elegant, patient, reasonable-sounding thing you called wisdom, turned out to be the lock on a door you were standing in front of the whole time. You stayed. And the question worth holding right now before anything else is this: why did you stay? Not the polite answer, the real one. Because somewhere between the first chapter and this one, something in you recognized itself. Recognition like that does not happen by accident. It happens when a person is ready to stop pretending the room is locked. You have not arrived here to receive a final instruction. There is no checklist on the other side of this page. What is here in these last words is something quieter and more permanent than a strategy. What is here is a confirmation. And the fact that you are listening to it, that you made it to this sentence, means the confirmation already has a recipient. One question stays deliberately open through this section all the way through. It is the one threading through every chapter before this one. The question is not how do you get wealthy. The question is, when does a person actually become someone who will be wealthy? When does the future version stop being a fantasy and start being a direction? Hold that. The answer is coming, but not yet. Remember the season you were in from 3 years back as it really was. Not the circumstances. Not the apartment, the job, the account balance. Think about who you were in the quiet moments, the ones between tasks, the ones at 2 in the morning when honesty comes without invitation. Did that version of you believe in the settled part of yourself, that a different financial life was genuinely possible for you? Not theoretically, not for people with certain advantages. For you specifically, with your history and your particular set of what feels like limitations. Most people, if they answer honestly, will say no. That version of you was waiting, waiting to feel ready, waiting for the right information, waiting for the economy to cooperate, for the timing to align, for some internal signal that never quite arrived. And here is what this book has been building toward since the first chapter. That waiting was not wisdom. It was a decision dressed in patience's clothing. There is a man named Celestino who grew up in a family that had no working model for money. Not bad people, not careless people, just people for whom money was a source of anxiety rather than a tool. They passed that anxiety down the way families pass recipes, without meaning to, but with remarkable consistency. Celestino reached 31 with a decent income and nothing saved. He had read the books. He had the spreadsheet. He had even, in a moment of genuine determination, opened a separate savings account and named it Future. 11 months later, it had $40 in it. The problem, he thought, was discipline. The problem, he thought, was that he needed a better system. He spent 6 months finding the better system. He was still waiting when the car needed a repair and the $40 left. What changed for Celestino was not a new app. It was one sentence he said out loud, alone in his kitchen on a Tuesday morning in October. He said, I am not going to wait until I feel like a person who handles money well. I am going to be that person right now and feel it later. He said it to no one. It changed everything, not because of the words, because of the finality in them, because he stopped leaving himself a door to walk back through. That is the decision horizon. That is the line this book has been pointing at from the beginning. Most people imagine the decision to be wealthy as something grand, a moment of inspiration, a revelation at a seminar, a conversation that cracks something open. And sometimes it is those things, but more often it is a Tuesday in October in a kitchen. More often it is a quiet, unwitnessed moment where you stop negotiating with yourself and simply declare which side of the line you are standing on, not because everything is figured out, not because the path is clear, but because the person who waits for clarity before deciding is not waiting for clarity. They are protecting themselves from the weight of having chosen. Here is the answer to the question you have been holding. The moment a person becomes someone who will be wealthy is not when they get the raise, not when the investment pays off, not when the debt is gone. It is the moment the inner negotiation ends, the moment you stop auditing your worthiness and start operating from it. That is when the before becomes the after. That is when the room that was always unlocked stops being a metaphor and starts being a door you walk through on an ordinary morning. You are past that moment. Right now, listening to this sentence, you are on the other side of it. Not because this chapter declared it so, but because you made it here. The person who listens to 9 chapters of a book about wealth and keeps going is not the person who was never going to change. That person stopped at chapter 2. That person closed the app during the uncomfortable parts. You did not. Something in you recognized that the discomfort was the point, that the moment the mirror gets close is precisely the moment to hold still, not walk away. This is not the instruction. This is the confirmation. Whatever you call the force that put this recording in your hands today, timing, circumstance, an algorithm, a conversation, a moment of restlessness at midnight that made you reach for something real, it does not matter what you call it. What matters is that you were ready for it when it arrived. Readiness does not announce itself in advance. It announces itself by what you do when something true comes near. You stayed. That is the announcement. And now the final thing. The one this entire book has been building toward. The thing that was promised in the first chapter and earned through everyone that followed. Waiting for the right moment was never about the moment. It was always about the identity. An identity that had not been claimed. An identity that felt like it belonged to someone else, someone with different starting conditions, better luck, an easier path. But you have seen now, over the course of these 10 chapters, that the identity is not issued to you by your circumstances. It is declared by you, in your own voice, in an ordinary moment, with no one watching but you. The wealth does not come first and then make you into someone who deserves it. You become that person first, in a single irrevocable declaration, and the wealth follows. Because you have stopped blocking it with conditions. The room was never locked. You were standing in front of an open door, asking someone for the key. No one needs to hand you a key to a room that was always open. You just have to stop waiting to walk in. This audiobook found you the hour you decided to be wealthy.